Hello, this is MakerJ101, and check out what I've made. So I'm going to call this the glass carburetor, even though it's made out of acrylic. I made this on the lathe at Hack Pittsburgh, which is a makerspace that I go to. They have a lot of awesome tools and awesome community there. But anyways, so I'm going to demonstrate how a carburetor works by running this on a Briggs Stratton engine. Alright, so here's the poor Briggs & Stratton lawnmower that we will be victimizing today. You can see the carburetor is all hooked up already. You can even see the fuel level there. I added some two-stroke oil to the fuel so that we can actually see it flowing through and squirting into the carburetor and into the airstream, which will give us a good visual. Over here we have a small manifold valves which will be controlling the fuel flow into the carburetor. So those will be our high and low speed jet screw adjustments on a carburetor. Mostly closed. We have the butterfly open there. And let's give it a pull and see what it'll start with. So let's close these valves slightly because I think we're getting far too much fuel flow. That actually works pretty good. I think we're still getting a little bit too much fuel to the idle jet. So let's close that a little bit. Well, there you go. It's something, that's for sure. Garage is filled with smoke. Lots of smoke. A Venturi type carburetor. What's a Venturi? Well, to understand what a Venturi is, you have to understand Bernoulli's principle. Bernoulli's principle states that as a fluid's velocity increases, its pressure decreases. So let's say you have a stream of gas that's moving at a very high velocity. Well, its pressure is going to be decreased. It doesn't make sense, but that's the way science works. So to demonstrate it, I have a glass of water here, and I have a straw. So I'm going to put this straw in the glass of water. So then I have a second straw that I'm going to be blowing into, and I'm going to hold this at a 90-degree angle to the first straw. And what's going to happen is that high velocity gas is going to be exiting the end of this tube. This one is going to be in that high velocity gas stream, and because it's in the high velocity gas stream, due to Bernoulli's principle, there is a decrease in pressure, and because there's decreased pressure compared to the air surrounding it and the air pressing down on the top of the water, atmospheric pressure will then push on the surface of the water and push the water out of the straw, and it will get dispersed as a fine mist. So here we go. Pretty cool, isn't it? Freaking science! So here are the main parts of this basic carburetor. So over here we would have the air filter mounted. This is the choke valve, so you would close this when you're starting the engine to give it a much richer fuel-air mixture. Moving down here we have the venturi part of the carburetor. So venturi is basically restriction in a tube that some fluid flows through. And as the fluid flows through that restriction, it increases in velocity. And an increase in velocity due to Bernoulli's principle creates a drop in pressure. And that principle is actually what causes the fuel through this high-speed jet to get sucked into the fuel-air mixture stream. Moving down here, we have the butterfly valve or throttle valve, and as you can see, it's actually made out of a quarter. I'm quite proud of that. And then here we have the low-speed jet or the idle jet. So this supplies fuel when the throttle valve is closed. And that's pretty much the basic parts of this carburetor. This is an adjustable hammer. This is a diagram of a carburetor. Do you see the resemblance? No, I didn't think so. Moving on. Carburetor is a combination of the words carburate and burette. Carburate means to carbonate something, or to carbonate air, basically to mix fuel with air, because fuel is mostly carbon. Burette means to accurately measure a liquid. So the definition of carburetor is to accurately mix fuel and air together. Now, how does the carburetor do? Well, it simply uses the Venturi effect and Bernoulli's principle, which we demonstrated just a minute ago. And essentially uses the principle that air, when it goes through a restriction, the velocity increases, and that increase in velocity dictates a decrease in pressure. Now, that pressure in this area here is pressure, okay, pressure P, is proportional to the velocity. So, if we have an increase in velocity, we have a proportional drop in pressure. This is a proportionality. The pressure is proportional to the velocity. Let's talk about an example here. So let's say that there's a certain velocity of air moving through this carburetor, getting sucked up by the engine. The engine's happy right now, it's at an idle. You open the throttle valve, the engine speeds up. That creates a twofold increase in the velocity of the air moving through the carburetor. What is that going to do? Well, it's going to decrease the pressure here by 2 times. So let's say the pressure originally at idle was 1 millimeter of mercury, vacuum, and after that increase in the engine speed and thus increase in velocity of the air moving through the carburetor, you would see 2 millimeters of mercury here at the fuel jet. Now, what is that going to do? It's going to proportionally increase the amount of fuel getting sucked in from the float bowl. What is that going to do? Well, it's going to basically keep the fuel-air ratio very consistent. You need a constant fuel-air mixture for an internal combustion engine to run properly, because obviously if you have too lean of a mixture, your engine won't run. If it's too rich, your engine won't run. So you need a very, very precise fuel-air mixture to keep your engine running. Now, if that wasn't confusing enough, let's talk about the low-speed jet, also known as the idle jet. The idle jet is extremely important at an idle, because at an idle, you have your throttle valve mostly closed, the engine's running fairly slowly, so your actual amount of air entering and passing through the carburetor is quite small. And when you have a very small amount of air, the Venturi effect is quite small, and so you actually won't get any fuel coming out of the high-speed jet at an idle. So that's a problem, because then there's no fuel and the engine will die. So what they came up with is to add a low-speed jet, and it is after the throttle valve. So when the throttle valve is closed, now the vacuum of the engine, because the engine is fighting against the throttle plate, so it's trying to pull air in, so it creates a vacuum, a partial vacuum here, and that partial vacuum is actually what sucks the fuel out of the fuel bowl and continues feeding fuel into the engine. Now this mixture is generally pretty rich, and once that throttle valve is open, then the vacuum is actually quite low, and the idle jet pretty much stops working. So they're kind of one or the other, and they kind of gradually increase or decrease depending on the position of the throttle valve. Alright, so you guys know I put a lot of work into these videos, making this little carburetor, drawing all these nice diagrams for you guys. So why don't you give it a like and subscribe down below, and don't forget to comment and tell me whether you think I'm insane or what. And as always, thanks for watching and keep experimenting.